We begin with that historic announcement from the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates by 0.75%. Now, that's the largest interest rate hike since 1994 as the Fed races to tame the highest level of inflation in nearly 40 years. After the decision, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the central bank will do what it takes to bring prices down and ease the burden on Americans who are struggling to make ends meet.
The current picture is plain to see. The labor market is extremely tight, and inflation is much too high. We're not going to declare victory until we see a series of these, really see convincing evidence, compelling evidence that inflation is coming down.
Farnoosh Torabi, CNET Money Editor at Large, joins us now. Farnoosh, good morning. We're great to have you with us because, look, people are waking up this morning stressed, wondering what it means from them. We're happy to have you walk us through it. So what do you make of this move from the Federal Reserve? Do you think it will be able to tame inflation and avoid sending the economy into a recession? Walk us through kind of all these little maneuvers and what they mean together.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and good morning to everybody. I think it was an appropriate move. I mean, look, it's a historic by some measures. We haven't seen a rate hike of this size since the 90s. And I think it's appropriate because when you look at where inflation is and the fact that average households are spending an extra $350 a month on expenses that they had last year, the same expenses they have this year, nothing else has changed except prices have just gone up. Their wages have not caught up to that. And so I think it was necessary. Now, what this is going to mean for us is that ultimately, the Fed understands that help is urgent. They need to really step in and not be sort of passive or increase rates incrementally a little bit. They really need to be aggressive because we need to slow down prices. We need to cool the economy. The Fed benchmark inflation rate is about 2%. We're at like 4 times that right now. It's going to be a little bit difficult or a lot difficult depending on your situation going forward, because when you raise interest rates, what does that mean? It means that there's going to be some temporary pain. Borrowing money, whether that's because you carry a credit card, a student loan that has a variable interest rate, or you're looking for a mortgage, rates are going up and they may adjust higher, again, if your rate is an adjustable variable loan rate. And so the cost of borrow will go up. And we may see layoffs as well, because when borrowing costs go up, that doesn't just mean our costs as consumers, but also as business owners. So borrowing capital to hire, to buy machinery, to expand, that's all going to become more expensive for employers. And then so the counter effect to that is usually layoffs.
So you're talking about some of this, but I mean, we've heard about how much of a difference these rate hikes have overall on the economy. Layoffs is a really good example, but walk us through how these moves from the Federal Reserve will impact people at home, people who are struggling to keep up with this rampant inflation. I mean, I think the assumption from the regular person at home is, well, I think they're doing this to help me. I think this is supposed to make things better. Will it?
Yeah. In the long run, this is a journey. Let's all remember that it's not going to fix the economy overnight. The idea is that by raising interest rates, it's going to slow down spending. There is a lot of demand for goods and services right now. And as we know, supply is just not catching up to that. And that's not our fault. The supply disruptions have been happening since COVID. And that is not something we can Fed hike our way out of. So we have to also address that. But for consumers, what this will mean is that, our rates are going to go up on credit cards and other sorts of debt. And so if you're in the market for a home, if you're in the market for a credit card, if you're in the market for other kinds of borrowing costs, you really want to pay attention to that interest rate. The silver lining is that savings rates could also go up as rates go up. So again, this is intentional. The economy, in order for the economy to cool, we need to slow down spending and save. And so there may be more a higher interest rate waiting for you at your bank, or definitely good time to shop around for higher yields.
Farnoosh Torabi, thank you so much. Lots of good advice for people at home there and the reality of the situation, but some things that can ease some fears. Thanks for your time this morning. Let's now get reaction from the White House to all this from NBC News reporter Maura Barrett. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Maura, always great to have you on. So we saw, of course, that this effort is to fight inflation. And we know President Biden said a couple weeks ago he would just let the Fed do its job without interference. Do we think that will still be the case if this rate hike does not get inflation under control?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, we knew this interest rate was coming, the hike was coming, right? And the White House has known that. We didn't know it was going to be so high. But over the last several weeks, the president and the White House have been hedging what they can do. Remember, the Fed is independent from the White House. The White House Economic Council of Advisors, though, saying that they believe in the Fed and that the president trusts in the Fed and that it's the first line of defense in order to tackle inflation. Now, separately, though, the White House is saying that it's doing what it can, noting that there's still work to be done. Overnight, we learned that today the president will sign into law the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. This was passed on a bipartisan measure by Congress earlier this week. And this is something that will address those high shipping prices. All of us have been impacted by those holdups on the supply chain. And during the pandemic, ocean shipping prices were spiked up to over almost 1,000%, according to the White House. And so this law will increase oversight over items like that, which impact retailers and farmers that are trying to ship their goods out, as well as consumers like us that are trying to buy goods. And so separate from those interest rate hikes, this is one of the things that the White House is trying to tackle when it comes to inflation.
Let's also talk about gas prices. We know the White House is also putting pressure on oil companies to increase their refining capacity. This is one of those very direct pains that people are feeling right now, how much it costs for gas really across the whole country. Tell us about this new stance.
Right, and the White House has been quick to remind that the gas price impact that we're seeing is a result mostly to the war in Ukraine, calling it Putin's price hike, right, because of the spike that we're seeing. And so yesterday, the president sent a letter to various CEOs of gas companies urging them to increase production when it comes to oil, gas, and diesel, because if there's more on the market, that means prices will go down. He said that he is prepared to use necessary tools and emergency authorizations to make sure that refinery production is increased. And I want you to hear from White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday about where the White House sees the responsibility on these corporations.
We see it as a patriotic duty, as we've talked about. There's war happening right now in Ukraine that was caused by Russia, which is why we're seeing these hikes in gas prices, especially since Russia has started amassing troops on the border. We've seen a $2 increase of gas prices. So we know where to put the blame on the war, but oil companies, they have oil refineries, they have responsibility too. What they have been doing is taking advantage of the war.
So you heard that claim of patriotic duty. It appears the White House playing a blame game on who can take responsibility for what, right? There's only so much the president can do himself. He said earlier this week in Philadelphia that there is still a lot of work to be done. There's stuff the White House can do, but he also noted that there's work these oil companies can do, as well as Congress, to bring down costs on prescription drug prices and childcare costs, Savannah.
Lots of places people are really hoping to feel some relief. Maura Barrett, thank you so much. Now, the January 6th House committee investigating the attack on the U.S. Capitol will hold its third public hearing this afternoon, and we're expected to hear more about former President Trump's efforts to pressure his then Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the 2020 election results. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa joins us now with a preview. Hey, Ali, good morning. So each of these has had their own sort of focus, their own thesis statement for what all this evidence is trying to support that day. Today, that's the focus, Mike Pence and Trump's efforts to get him to intervene. So what is the committee planning to zero in on? How are they trying to prove that?
Yeah, Savannah, well, you laid out the main topic there, but the committee told reporters yesterday that this hearing is going to be divided really into four themes, the first of which is really the birth of this conspiracy that former Vice President Mike Pence would be able to overturn the election unilaterally. The second is Trump's actual pressure campaign on the vice president, how that pressure campaign was pushed and really publicized on Twitter and as well as in private phone calls and meetings that the president had with the former vice president, and then how that led to the violence at the Capitol that day, and how the violence at the Capitol that day really continues to threaten our democracy. The committee is saying that we are going to again hear never before seen testimony, video, photos. We're going to hear from two witnesses, one of them Greg Jacobs, former advisor to Mike Pence, as well as an informal advisor, a legal advisor advisor that he had. And they're expected to really talk about one of them being with him that day, what that was like. We've seen that video of him being shuffled off of the Senate floor, taken to a safe space with his Secret Service detail, really what it was like being in that room with him during that waiting period as they waited to be able to leave safely. Another person we're expected to hear from in pre-recorded testimony is Mark Short, his former chief of staff. The committee providing exclusive video only to NBC News ahead of this hearing, showing a little preview of Mark Short's pre-recorded testimony. Listen here.
Was it your impression that the vice president had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the president, not just to the world through a Dear Colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times.
And had been consistent in conveying his position to the president?
Very consistent.
So the committee is committed to showing just how much the former vice president knew about the former president's pressure campaign and how he continued to deny that he was able to do so even up until that morning. Committee member Pete Aguilar telling my colleague Garrett Haake in a video that will air later this morning, really that the vice president was in more danger than any of us knew that morning, Savannah.
Allie, quickly, I do want to get to something that we teased a minute ago, which is this new footage released just yesterday of a man who they say made verbal threats against top lawmakers. We know he was given a tour of the Capitol. Here's that video just a day before by a Georgia congressman. Quickly, tell us about what that congressman is saying. How is he responding to it?
Yeah, this is a second letter by the committee asking for more information from Loudermilk about that tour he gave the day before the insurrection at the Capitol. Of course, tours being prohibited because of COVID during that time. And Loudermilk has first stated months ago that he didn't even give that tour. Now he's saying that he doesn't think it was suspicious. He doesn't think there was any wrongdoing here, even though he took this group of people, these constituents from Georgia, really to these insignificant places in the Capitol that I walk by every day. There's really no historical or tourist significance. Listen to a piece of his reaction here.
They've never sent me a letter asking me, never called me. They send it to you guys. So if they were interested in the truth, they had a year and 4 months to call me and talk. I would have been glad to talk to them about it because there's nothing there. And
so why not just speak to the committee and just...
Because the committee's never called me and asked me anything.
They sent a letter asking for your voluntary cooperation.
They never sent it to me.
Your office never received it?
No, never.
The committee saying that one member of that group was seen on January 6th outside the Capitol making threats to several Democratic lawmakers. Savannah.
All right, Allie Rafa, lots to watch for this afternoon. Thank you so much. And let's stay on this and bring in Barbara McQuaid. She's a former U.S. attorney and a law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. Barbara, good morning. Thanks for being with us. So let's start here with this focus. And I want to know what you think it's going to take here for this committee to sort of prove that Vice President Pence was being pressured to block the certification of the election, President Trump's involvement in it. What does the committee need to do to successfully make that case to the public?
Well, Savannah, I think this is the topic that is the most closely aligned to a potential criminal charge. You know, everybody sees the mob scene as, you know, clearly the most dangerous part of what happened on January 6th. But it can be difficult to tie President Trump to that mob. Where we can tie him precisely directly to this attack is his efforts to pressure Mike Pence to overturn the election. Now, we don't have Pence himself to testify. That would be the best way to prove it. But we do know that we're going to hear from two people who are the next best thing. Greg Jacob, who was his chief counsel, and it sounds like video testimony from Mark Short, who was his chief of staff. And I believe what they're going to testify to, because it has been reported about their deposition testimony, that they're going to talk about how President Trump pressured Mike Pence right up until and on January 6th to overturn the election. We know he did it publicly. He did it at the Ellipse rally. He did it in tweets. But what those close to Mike Pence will say is that he continued to pressure him on January 6th and even said, wouldn't it be great to have that power to be able to control the outcome of the election? And Mike Pence said, no, that's horrifying. We're a democracy. We don't do it that way. So I think this is a very effective way to show that Donald Trump tried to defraud the United States and obstruct an official proceeding.
You mentioned a tweet. You mentioned tweets, and there's one specifically that's going to come into play today. So one of the things that we're expecting to see is the panel make this case that Pence's life was actually in more physical danger than previously known than we'd realized. And California Congressman Pete Aguilar told NBC News that Trump knew the Capitol had been breached when he sent out this disparaging tweet about his former vice president. What do you make of that, and does it help prove anything?
It's really horrifying. I think that, before this reporting, there was the possibility that the news had not yet reached Donald Trump, that the Capitol had been breached. And so he was still persisting in this effort to pressure Mike Pence. Knowing that he was aware that the Capitol had been breached and that Mike Pence was in physical danger, continuing to foment this kind of rage is incredibly irresponsible. It's reckless. Now, does it tie Trump to the mob violence? I don't know that it gets there. I think this is part of the story that the committee needs to tell. I don't know that it ultimately is part of the story of proving a crime against Donald Trump.
Barbara, something we are all going to be watching for this afternoon. I do want to switch gears before I let you go to just ask you a question about a different topic here. The shooting last month at a Buffalo supermarket. So federal prosecutors have filed hate crime charges against the gunman at this point. What do you make of that? Was that expected, given what the criminal complaint says the motive was and what we know about what happened that day?
I think so. This is really about the best and strongest crime that exists. As you know, there's no federal domestic terrorism statute which would fit these crimes. But hate crime, meaning an act of violence on account of a person's race, absolutely fits these charges. I think the thing to watch for that's really interesting here is this is a death-eligible offense. And in an administration with Joe Biden, who has expressed his opposition to the death penalty, this is one of those cases that will really test that viewpoint. It's one of those worst-case scenarios when people can always say, yeah, but what about death in this horrible scenario? And this is one of them. So it'll be interesting to see. And this decision won't come until down the road after the Justice Department has had a chance to look at all the potential mitigating factors, whether they will seek the death penalty.
Barbara McQuaid, thank you so much for your analysis and your time this morning. We appreciate it. And you can watch today's hearing right here on NBC News Now. Our live coverage starts at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Now let's head to Montana, where the governor has declared a statewide disaster after that devastating flooding that hit the state. This morning, Yellowstone National Park remains closed indefinitely. Rising waters destroyed roads leading into the tourist destination, and we're learning it could be months before those entrances reopen. NBC News correspondent Miguel Almaguer has the latest there.
Whoa. This was the harrowing escape out of Yellowstone as boulders tumble down mountains and a home washed into a river, floating nearly 5 miles downstream.
We had no warning. They're just like, get in, get in, get in.
For Nicole O'Shea and nearly 100 other people cut off by dangerous, fast-rising floodwaters, these helicopter rides were their only chance for rescue.
It landed, and it was, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. It was so emotional because none of us were expecting it.
Across large swaths of Montana, historic flooding washed away roads and submerged them under feet of water.
The water started rolling in the back, broke out a basement window, started filling up my basement, and then I quit.
Holy! Even bridges with their mangled trestles floated downstream, ripped apart by raging currents.
It was frightening because in addition to all of this debris, you can hear the rocks in the creek. These are giant boulders.
A state of emergency as roads into Yellowstone National Park remain closed indefinitely at the start of the peak summer season.
It's safe to say that it's going to be an extended period of time. The northern end will be closed.
With 10,000 people evacuated from the nation's oldest national park, this is the first time flooding has ever closed it.
And in the afternoon, it started rising even more, and we had to move everything to high ground.
The deluge fueled by an atmospheric river or stream of moisture, pounding the region with inches of rain.
And it wasn't just rain, but snowmelt that filled these rivers. One of them rising 6 feet in just 24 hours. So much water, it toppled into nearby communities below. The water just now beginning to recede.
Historic flooding and unprecedented damage at one of our nation's most stunning national parks. Mother Nature's beauty now suffering from its wrath.
Today, the park remains closed indefinitely. We're told it could be a couple of weeks, if not months, until the roads open. That would be disastrous for the summer travel season and the families that want to come here. Meantime, in Billings, Montana, floodwaters are also threatening a water treatment plant. That city could run out of water in the next couple of days if the water levels don't recede. Back to you.
All right, Miguel Almaguer, thank you for that report from the ground. Let's now get a check on your morning news now weather, which means Michelle Grossman joins me now. Hey, Michelle, I mean, some of those images, the videos, it's just heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking. It's so sad. And we're going to add to those images, unfortunately. Good morning, Savannah, because we have those dangerous conditions continuing. We have dangerous heat, historical heat, record-breaking heat, not only this week, but it looks like it will be extended into next week as well. And this is just the beginning of the season. So let's take a look at how many people are under an alert. That's 61 million Americans. We have alerts stretching from the Central Plains to the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, down to the Southeast, the Southwest, too. We have excessive heat warnings. That's where you see that hot pink color. Where you don't see the alerts, it doesn't mean we're not going to have that high heat, because we are. In parts of the South, we're looking at temperatures near 100 degrees in many spots. 112 today in Phoenix, 99 in Dallas. It's going to feel like 100 degrees. It's going to feel like 109 in Tallahassee, and it's going to feel like 104 in Charlotte. So this is a wide swath of really warm air. You add in the humidity, and it just feels terrible. The jet stream so far to the north is allowing that heat and humidity in. It's sort of closing off any cool air from Canada. So by tomorrow, temperatures still near 100 degrees in many spots. Dallas, you're going to be at 100 degrees. Your heat index 103. So that's what it's going to feel like on your body. And look at Mobile, Alabama, the heat index of 110. The relentless heat wave, it does continue until the weekend and into next week. Nashville, 98 degrees on Monday. And Dallas, you will be at 101. It's sparking some storms this morning back to the west in parts of Michigan, Illinois. That is a cold front. We're seeing some strong storms. And in the Northeast, that's the warm front. We're seeing some strong storms, hearing lots of thunder and lots of lightning this morning, Savannah. And that cold front still needs to sweep through tomorrow in the Northeast, so we're not done with the storms yet. We'll talk more about that in the next hour.
All right, Michelle, sounds good. See you in a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.